Forever. Dog.
Oh, baby. I want to talk about the 80s. The 1980s, okay? Dude. That's why I've got these cool 1980s inspired sunglasses on. I'm the first one to ever attempt that, retro fashion inspired by the 80s. Now, on our Patreon bonus show, this is why I want to talk about the 80s, because on our Patreon bonus show, Weekend at Bergman's, where we pit art house movies versus popcorn movies in a vicious fight to the death, we've been doing this interminable 1980s season to determine the greatest movie of the 1980s, and it is finally, after a full year, finally nearing its conclusion. A year plus, probably 14 months, I think this is going to end up being this season. But it's finally nearing its conclusion, thank God. And I'll have more on that in a second. But first, I wanted to take a step back because going into this season, this 1980s season, I was aware of the characterization of the 80s that has emerged in, let's call it, film discourse. And that characterization is that the 1980s are the worst movie decade. The worst movie decade. I've heard Tarantino say this. I've heard it other places. The 80s are bullshit, man. And the rationale for this 80s hate, and we're mainly talking about the American cinema of the 80s here. The rationale is that the 80s is the decade when the studios and the industry powers regained control over the filmmaking process after the more auteur-driven output of the 1970s, after that collapsed with expensive flops like Heaven's Gate, et cetera, et cetera. And so in the 80s, with the studios back in control, filmmaking became more generic and commercial again, and reflective of Reagan's America, it became more conservative, a little cheesier, more focused on likability than provocation. It sold out. It became a medium for the normies again. And you also had the ascendancy of the agencies as a major power player in the industry, namely Michael Ovitz at CAA. And with the rise of the agencies comes this concept of packaging, where Ovitz and other super agents would package their clients together in a project that they could then sell to the studios. And thus the movies coming out of the Hollywood studios in this era devolved into the box office fever dreams of Michael Ovitz and not the artistic visions of Coppola or Bogdanovich or Malick. That's the argument. And a lot of that is based in historical fact. That is the argument against the cinema of the 80s. And while I certainly agree that the 80s were one of the worst American decades in terms of politics and cultural trends, because it's the decade that started us on this death spiral of unregulated capitalism and evangelical culture wars and oligarchy and resurgent white supremacism. I don't agree. I agree with in general, the 80s were not a great decade. But I don't agree with this characterization that the cinema of the 1980s was similarly regressive. And in fact, I've come to believe, having done this season of Weekend at Bergman's, all about the 80s, I've come to believe that the movies of the 1980s, and this isn't just about America now. The cinema, the global cinema of the 80s, far from being the worst decade, actually represents the pinnacle of the medium, both artistically and commercially. Because that's the thing about the movies, is that they exist right at the center of the art commerce divide. A movie can be a transcendent work of art. A movie can also be the most popular, profitable commercial product in the world. And some movies, several movies in the 80s were capable of being both. A movie can be pop culture trash, and a movie can cut so deep to the heart of the human experience that it hurts to watch it. Alem Klimov's Come and See, the greatest anti-war movie ever made. That's a movie. Jim Wynorski's Chopping Mall. That's a movie. And sure, you have this divide between high and low in every medium. You have War and Peace and you have beach books. Obviously, literature also has this high-low divide. Every medium has this. Every creative medium has this high-low divide. But with the movies, that divide is exaggerated to a point beyond the other mediums. It's exaggerated and writ large because of the powers of movies as a mass medium, because of how much they've dominated our culture over the last 100-odd years. And if you're like me and your love of the movies relies on this divide, if your letterboxed watch history veers wildly from one day to the next between the sacred and the profane of cinema, then you might very well agree with me that the 80s is the best movie decade, because it's the decade that best represents the totality of what a movie can be. Let me give you a few specific examples of what I'm talking about. A few specific examples of why the 80s is the best movie decade. Let's start with the obvious, the blockbuster, the summer blockbuster. This is where a lot of the criticism of the 80s originates, but for me, it's one of the strengths of the 80s, the summer blockbuster, the rise of the summer blockbuster. In the 70s, and the 70s, for all of its artistic successes, was also, well known for its commercial successes as well. It just so happened that the artistic and the commercial were more one and the same in the 70s. Because you had movies like The Godfather and The Exorcist, and most famously Jaws and Star Wars, that raised the ceiling on what the box office of an individual movie could be. And as a result, these movies were marketed more aggressively throughout the 70s, distributed more widely. Jaws, in particular, changed the calculus of Hollywood, and it did pave the way for the blockbusters of the 80s. And perhaps the thing that Jaws changed the most about the movies, besides unintentionally sowing the seeds of new Hollywood's destruction, because it gave the studios a template that they could use, making them a little less reliant on the auteurs. But besides that, Jaws also cemented this cultural shift that is often talked about, where people were no longer going to the movies, they were going to a movie, to a particular movie. Because it used to be in the golden age of the studio system that the studios churned out, what were these studios doing, 50 movies a year? And then so when you went to, and that's just the A movies, not counting the B movies, the shorter reels, et cetera, et cetera. And so people would just go to the movies every weekend. They would go to the movies. And then MGM would have their movie, and Fox would have their movie. Paramount would have their movie. Warner Brothers would have their movie. RKO, et cetera, United Artists. And people would just see whatever was playing because they just wanted to go to the movies. But with the rise of television, et cetera, there was more competition. And so the way that Hollywood survived is the invention of the blockbuster. the movie event. So now you had to go to this movie. You had to go see Jaws. You had to go see The Godfather. You had to go see the movie everybody was talking about. That system was born in the 70s, in the middle of New Hollywood, in the middle of the auteur era. But it really came of age in the 80s. And it came of age with New Hollywood vets like Spielberg and Lucas. Spielberg and Lucas thrived in this new system, thrived. And it's funny that I've grown to love the 80s so much because Spielberg and Lucas were never really my guys. But in doing this 1980s season, I've definitely gained a new respect for them. Hell, I've gained a new respect for frickin' Robert Zemeckis having done this season. Because I think I often associated with them with, oh, they were the sellouts of New Hollywood. I don't feel that way anymore. I think they actually were preserving a lot of the spirit of New Hollywood in the era of the blockbuster and the corporatization of Hollywood. I think without them, the 80s would have been the slop factory that people sometimes accuse it of being. But Spielberg and Lucas were so good at negotiating between art and commerce. They were so good at playing the game of Hollywood without sacrificing their souls. They were so good at giving the studios the big paydays that they needed to survive in this new economy, while also still carving out artistic freedom for their projects and for their collaborators. Lucas, in negotiating the deal for Empire Strikes Back, was so good at carving out artistic freedom for his director, his writers, his crew, his effects people. And in so doing, keeping the dream of New Hollywood alive within this new era of the blockbuster. The Empire Strikes Back, Raiders of the Lost Ark, E.T., Superman 2, Beverly Hills Cop, Ghostbusters, Back to the Future, the frickin' Rocky sequels, Top Gun, Aliens, Who Framed Roger Rabbit, Batman. Butts in seats. Day 1. Coming back day 2 to see it again. Butts in seats. They just re-released Back to the Future for its 40th anniversary. And it was like the 5th biggest movie of the week. It outperformed new releases. And again, Back to the Future, not even one of my favorite movies of the 80s. I'm not a Back to the Future guy. You know that. If you've listened to Weekend at Bergman's. But you can't deny the power of the blockbuster. And if you're a real movie lover, the 80s summer blockbusters are not your enemies. They're not your enemies. Did you hear that list of movies I just read out? Those movies are not your enemies. They're not your enemies because they're not the enemies of the movies. There's original IP all over that list. There's vision, there's creativity. There's pure cinema on that list. I mean, compared to the current state of the summer blockbuster, that list I just read is a freaking cinematic paradise. And I should say, I also don't agree with the argument against the 80s that it created the slippery slope that has led to the onslaught of comic book movies and endless franchise sequels that we currently live in. I don't agree with that argument because the history of Hollywood is not a straight line. It's a pendulum swing. And yes, the 80s summer blockbusters sort of predict and echo the current obsession with comic book blockbusters, franchise sequels, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But in between those two decades is the 90s. And the 90s was very much a return to the dream of the 70s, a return to the auteur era with the rise of Sundance and Miramax and Tarantino and Paul Thomas Anderson and everyone else. It was a period when the pendulum swung back in the other direction. So you could say that the comic book movies of today are definitely resurrecting the 80s blockbuster obsession, but there's not a direct line between the two. There was a pendulum swift right back in the other direction between those two eras. And if the blockbuster was all that the 80s produced, I would not be making this argument. But of course, it wasn't all the 80s produced. Because contrary to popular belief, I don't think that the dream of New Hollywood, the dream of an auteur-driven, socially conscious, politically conscious, artistic Hollywood, I don't think that that dream died with Heaven's Gate in 1979, 1980. Now, it certainly became harder in the 80s for the New Hollywood auteurs to get funding for their movies, to get their movies made. And some of them certainly fell off. Some of them never returned to form after the 70s. Bogdanovich, sorry, not to pick on Bogdanovich. If we're being honest, Altman, you know, sure, you have Secret Honor and you have The Player and I don't know, Gosford Park, but he never returned to his Long Goodbye, McCabe and Mrs. Miller, Nashville run. Never returned to those highs, at least not consistently. But on the other hand, there are a lot of New Hollywood directors associated with the New Hollywood movement of the 70s, who did their best work in the 80s. Scorsese had his best decade in the 80s. Prove me wrong. Prove me wrong. Look at the filmography. Raging Bull, King of Comedy, After Hours, Color of Money, Last Temptation of Christ. That's Scorsese's best decade. And if there's any competition, it's not the 70s, it's the 90s. Goodfellas, Casino, Age of Innocence. That's pretty strong competition, but I still got to go with the 80s. Either way, though, it's not the 70s. De Palma had a hell of a decade in the 80s. Also, arguably, his best decade. Dress to Kill, Blowout, Scarface, Body Double, The Untouchables, Casualties of War. That's De Palma's best decade, not the 70s. And I love Carrie and Phantom of the Paradise. But listen to that run I just read out. That's De Palma's best decade. Even the directors who really struggled financially, professionally in the 80s, Coppola being at the top of that list. You know, Coppola in the 70s, he's the king of Hollywood. The Godfathers, Apocalypse Now, The Conversation just for the hell of it. The Godfathers put him at the top of Hollywood, both artistically and financially. It's very rare that a director is the top of both of those pyramids at the same time. And Coppola was in the mid-70s. But that boy's got to do it his own way. He's an independent at heart. He don't play well with the studio system. And Hollywood, you know, in the 80s made him pay for it. It was hard as hell for him to get movies financed. And Zoetrope is, you know, bombing out, endless problems. But listen to these movies. One from the Heart, Rumblefish, Peggy Sue Got Married. All of his, like, underappreciated classics are in the 80s. It's not his best decade, but he's still doing great work in the 80s. Great work in the 80s. And then, of course, Spielberg and Lucas, the kings of the 80s, the commercial darlings of the 80s, came out of New Hollywood. They came out of New Hollywood. And if you're a cynic, you can say they sold New Hollywood out, but I don't believe that. I don't believe that. In fact, I think they kept the dream of New Hollywood alive against the likes of the Michael Ovitzes of the world. The dream of New Hollywood didn't die in the 80s. It evolved. And sure, you know, in the 80s, you couldn't swing by Bert Schneider's office and hang out with Mama Cass and the Black Panthers. The town was definitely different. But if you're just considering the movies themselves, the popular understanding of this 70s, 80s divide is very flawed. Very flawed. And then outside of American cinema, and this is, for me, where the 80s really cements its reputation as a great film decade. Because in the same decade that Tony Scott is making Top Gun, Bergman and Kurosawa and Tarkovsky are still making movies. And not just any movies, final statement movies, last masterpieces. The 80s were the last hurrah decade for so many of the old masters. It was the decade when the greats, the Shakespeares of cinema, were making their last great movies. Listen to this list. In the 80s, Ingmar Bergman makes Fanny and Alexander. Akira Kurosawa makes Ron. Andrei Tarkovsky makes The Sacrifice. Robert Bresson makes L'Argent. John Cassavetes makes Gloria and Love Streams. This part of the 80s gets forgotten. This gets forgotten when we're talking about the cinema of the 80s. Every book about the cinema of the 80s, it'll be Indiana Jones and Batman and E.T. and Tom Cruise, and for good reason. But these movies also came out in the 80s. Did you hear that list I just read off? Fanny and Alexander, Ron, The Sacrifice, L'Argent, Gloria, Love Streams. Those movies came out in the 80s. The 80s. Supposedly the dumb decade for movies. And in addition to that, while you have all these old masters making their last great masterpieces, you also have this ascendant new generation, this new independent generation of filmmakers. So while you have these great careers in their final descent, you have so many great careers in their first ascent, beginning their ascent. The 80s gives us the early work of the Coen brothers, Spike Lee, Susan Seidelman, Jim Jarmusch, Catherine Bigelow, Steven Soderbergh, Lizzie Borden. The list goes on. All of these great directors who paved the way for the explosion of the American independent cinema of the 90s. Much like the New Hollywood era of the 70s was predicted by all those great late 60s movies. Bonnie and Clyde, 2001, The Graduate, Easy Rider. The 80s also has that late 60s energy, that the beginnings of a new independent cinema energy to them. At the same time that it's doing summer blockbusters, that it's still doing great work by the New Hollywood directors, that it's doing the last masterpieces of the old masters. It's doing everything at once. The 80s is this incredible mix of early career directors, mid-career directors, and late career directors all doing incredible work. And then to get down in the muck and the mire, it was a great decade for genre movies. A great decade for genre movies. Sword and sorcery, fantasy, sci-fi, horror. The 80s is the best horror decade? I mean, what would compete with it? It's definitely the most prolific horror decade. And again, sure, the 70s have the like Mount Rushmore horror movies. Exorcist, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Halloween, Last House on the Left. But the 80s was such a prolific decade for horror. Starting in 80, listen to this. And these are some of my favorites. This is like not even remotely exhaustive. Motel Hell, Maniac, Fade to Black, The Howling, Possession, My Bloody Valentine, The Thing, Poltergeist, Sleepaway Camp, A Nightmare on Frickin' Elm Street, Friday the 13th, Hellraiser, The Stuff, Near Dark, The Video Dead, The Lost Boys, Slumber Party Massacre 2, the aforementioned Chopping Mall, Child's Play, Killer Clowns from Outer Space, 976 Evil, Society. Those are literally just my favorites. It's not even remotely exhaustive. And again, think about the career of John Carpenter. Yes, Halloween is foundational horror, canonical horror, masterpiece level horror, and it came out in the 70s. But the 80s is Carpenter's best decade by a mile. I mean, that one's not even close. The Thing, They Live, Escape from New York, Christine, The Fog, that's not even all of them. There's no question that the 80s is John Carpenter's best decade. As it is Scorsese's best decade, De Palma's best decade. So in conclusion, the 1980s are the best movie decade of all time because the 1980s is the most movies decade of all time. It was all happening. It was an embarrassment of riches in the 80s. And if you don't believe me, just listen to these matchups. Dun 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 dun. The matchups for the first round of the Weekend at Bergman's 1980s tournament. These are the matchups for the first round. Pee-wee's Big Adventure versus Child's Play. Raging Bull versus Fitzcarraldo. Opera. Dario Argento's Opera versus Withnail and I. Das Boot versus E.T. Repo Man versus Z and Two Knots. The Lost Boys versus Amadeus. Akira versus The Thing. Ron versus Come and See. Die Hard versus Harry and the Hendersons, underrated classic. Scarface versus The Long Good Friday. Roadhouse versus The Shining. Sex, Lies, and Videotape versus Raiders of the Lost Ark. Weekend at Bernie's versus The Sacrifice. Dead Ringers versus Videodrome, Cronenberg Showdown. Easily Cronenberg's best decade, 80s. Also, not an argument. The Thin Blue Line versus Do the Right Thing. The Last Temptation of Christ versus Blue Velvet. That's how good the 80s are. We haven't even mentioned David Lynch yet. Those are the matchups for the first round of the Weekend at Bergman's 1980s tournament. You are not going to want to miss this. It is only available on Patreon. We'll have the first episode coming out this week. It'll be the first half of this first round. The field of 32. Then we'll do the second half. Then we'll do Sweet 16, Elite 8, Final Four, Championship. You are not going to want to miss this. If you haven't signed up for the Patreon yet, now is the time to do it. You can start with a 7-day free trial. See what you think. And I think you're going to love it if you love the movies. That's patreon.com/moviesbaby with 5 Ys. Don't miss it. And I haven't even mentioned the spoilers. There's so many good movies in the 80s. We've instituted this thing for the tournament called the spoilers. And these are movies that we have not watched yet on Weekend at Bergman's. They're going to pop in, and they might be able to knock out some of the movies I previously mentioned. Here are the spoilers for the first round. This is not even all the spoilers. This is just the first round. To Live and Die in L.A. Oh, I love that movie. Clue. My Neighbor Totoro. Frickin' Miyazaki. Haven't even mentioned Miyazaki. 48 Hours. Women on the Verge of a Nervous Breakdown. Almodovar's getting going in the 80s. Gloria. My Dinner with Andre. Hollywood Shuffle. I love Hollywood Shuffle. So those spoilers will be popping in at inopportune times to potentially knock out the other movies in the tournament. It's going to be a lot of fun. It's going to be a freaking bloodbath. And at the end of it, we will determine the ultimate movie of the 1980s, the greatest movie of the 1980s, and we'll leave no stone unturned. It's movies, baby. Roll that theme song!
The backbone of this country is the independent film critic. The power of movies must be protected. The best thing about movies is the feeling they give. It's a feeling I want to feel every day. Movies, baby! Movies, baby! Movies, baby! Movies, baby!
I love a rap ball.
Welcome to Movies, baby. I'm Brett Boehm, a.k.a. the Georgia Movie Dog. Go Dogs. I'm coming to you live from the San Fernando Valley. And this weekend, oh boy, you better believe I was out at the movies this weekend. I saw The Running Man, Edgar Wright's The Running Man. Now You See Me, Now You Don't. Keeper from Osgood Perkins and Neon. And Lynn Ramsey's Die My Love. I cannot wait to spill my guts about these flicks. But first, you know how we do it. Show me the money. And by the money, I mean the weekend box office returns, baby. Well, well, well. Will you look at this? When you hear people say the only rule of the movie industry is that nobody knows anything, this is what they're talking about right here. Going into this weekend, I think everyone would agree that the big high-profile movie was Edgar Wright's adaptation of The Running Man with ascendant A-lister Glenn Powell, who I love, in the lead role. And yet, which movie won the box office? The third installment in the Now You See Me franchise, Now You See Me, Now You Don't, wiped the floor with The Running Man. Holy shit. Wiped the floor with it. Now You See Me, Now You Don't was the number one movie this weekend with 21.3 million domestic and 54.2 million internationally for a worldwide opening of 75.5 million. Wow, did Lionsgate need this? Holy shit, did Lionsgate need this? Lionsgate needed a win and they got one. And that's on a budget of 90 million. So not cheap, kind of a risk. But it paid off because this movie is well on its way to profitability with that big of an opening. Meanwhile, The Running Man, which cost over $100 million for Paramount, David Ellison's Paramount, The Running Man only made 17 million domestic and 28 million total worldwide. Ouch! 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 Below expectations and way below where they want to be with that kind of a budget. And then down at number 7, Osgood Perkins' Keeper from Neon. Wow, we are a long way from long legs now. Seems like maybe the Osgood Perkins Neon magic has finally run out after they had hits with Long Legs and The Monkey. And we'll talk all about the whole Osgood Perkins Neon grift. I said it. We'll talk all about that a little bit later on. But for now, let's talk about The Running Man, Edgar Wright's adaptation of Stephen King's The Running Man. This is the second swing at King's novel following the 1987 version with Arnold Schwarzenegger and Jesse the Body Ventura and Yaphet Kotto and others. Big-time TNT TBS staple back in the day. If you grew up around the time I grew up, I'm sure you also saw it in probably fragments 20 different times in over the course of your childhood. I love the original Running Man. Made in the 80s. But now it's 2025 and Edgar Wright coming off of, Last Night in Soho and the Sparks documentary and Baby Driver. Edgar Wright finally got to make his long gestating dream project, an adaptation of The Running Man. He's been trying to make it forever. He promised us it was going to be more faithful to the original novel than the Arnold Schwarzenegger movie. Okay. I mean, not a huge selling point for me because I like the Schwarzenegger version. I also never read the book. But okay, it's going to be more faithful to the Stephen King novel. Okay, great. Great. This version stars Glenn Powell in the lead role, Josh Brolin as the evil TV producer, Coleman Domingo as the evil game show host, Lee Pace as the evil assassin. We've also got William H. Macy here, Michael Cera, Amelia Jones, who I really like. She was just in that HBO show Task. And I'm sounding very sour right now, but I was optimistic coming into this movie because it had a pretty great trailer, I thought. Pretty nice cast. You know, some fun source material. I was ready for the big Edgar Wright turnaround. He's been in a little downswing, which I'll talk about in a second. I was ready for Edgar Wright to find his mojo again, and I thought this was going to be it. But unfortunately, he looks more lost than ever in The Running Man. And a lot of times when movies fail, you can spread the blame around. But with The Running Man, it is hard not to put all of the blame on Edgar Wright, the director and co-writer of this movie, because it's not that the performances are bad. I liked what Glenn Powell was doing. He's like playing it really angry. He's like an angry guy. He's so mad at the world. I liked that. I like Coleman Domingo. I liked Brolin in theory. I liked the performance. It's just that the dialogue was so atrocious. Michael Cera's fun. William H. Macy's fine. Lee Pace is fine. And again, I really like Amelia Jones, up-and-coming actor. But I think she's actually legally allowed to sue Edgar Wright for malpractice for the dog shit material that he gave her in this movie. The Running Man sort of like kidnaps her during his run. And at first she's like, "You're the Running Man. I hate you. I've seen you on TV and you're a bad guy." And then literally 1 minute later, "Oh, wow, I totally misjudged you, Running Man. You're actually a great guy." Awful material they give her in this movie. And that's why when you're looking for the problems in The Running Man, all roads lead to Edgar Wright. The script, which he co-wrote with Michael Bacall, is not nearly funny enough, for one. It has like the raw energy of a comedy, but without any like punchlines. It has that old Edgar Wright fast energy. And you feel like a comedy is happening, but you're not laughing. Or you feel like something funny is happening, action comedy, but you're not even remotely enjoying yourself or laughing. It's a lot of that like quippy secondhand Tarantino sort of patter that Edgar Wright likes, but with zero pleasure. There's just so much empty style in the dialogue. And for a movie that is aspiring to satire, a movie that is clearly aspiring to say something, to use dystopian sci-fi as a way of saying something, the emptiness of the dialogue dooms the movie from the get-go. There's no edge to the material. There's no satire here. There's just the aspiration to satire. It's just the most generic vision of a, I don't know, sort of corporate military industrial takeover of America where popular culture and regressive politics and socioeconomic inequality are all basically the same thing. Those are relevant themes, but they are presented here so poorly, so broadly, so inarticulately that there's no real satire here. There's just the aspiration to satire. The ending is confusingly bad. Confusingly bad. There's like three threads coming together, as you would expect in an action movie. But the way that they are knotted together to make an ending is so sloppy. It's almost like there's missing footage or something. It's one of those endings where you're like, is that the way you wanted to do it? Was there a warehouse fire and you lost some footage? I'm giving The Running Man 2 stars. Edgar Wright's The Running Man 2 stars. Edgar Wright's writing and direction would only get 1 star from me, but the movie does have some good performances and occasionally some good action sequences, so I'll go with 2 stars overall. But you can skip it. It's bad. So what happened to Edgar Wright? What happened to this guy? He came up in the late 90s, 2000s as part of the Simon Pegg, Nick Frost, Jessica Hines British comedy crew, the New Generation. He directed their great TV show Spaced, and not just theirs, it was his as well. He's part of the crew. I don't want to take that away from Edgar Wright. So he directed Spaced, and then he directed and co-wrote the so-called Cornetto trilogy with Simon Pegg, Shaun of the Dead, Hot Fuzz, The World's End. I love Spaced. I love the Cornetto trilogy. I think World's End is the best of the Cornetto trilogy, sue me. But I love all those. I love all that. I love that era of Edgar Wright. But now cut to 2025, and I dread having to watch this guy's movies now. What happened? I think there's 2 pretty obvious explanations for what happened here. The first one is the Ant-Man debacle. Edgar Wright was originally supposed to make Ant-Man for Marvel. It was a project that he had worked on for, I think, about 8 years. He worked on it for a long time. He was in production on Ant-Man, and then in 2014, Marvel fired him from the project over creative differences. And his quote at the time was they wanted to make a Marvel movie. They didn't want to make an Edgar Wright movie. Duh. I mean, what do you think? You signed on to make a Marvel movie. There's going to have to be some compromise. But to be fair and to sympathize with Edgar Wright, that must have been devastating. 8 years on a dream project that comes to nothing and then someone else makes the movie. That must have been devastating for him. That must have been really, really tough to feel like you wasted that much time. And the other thing that I'm sure made it hard was 2014, the year that he got fired from the project, was also the year that Guardians of the Galaxy came out, which has to, in some ways, resemble the kind of movie Edgar Wright was trying to make with Ant-Man, a sort of quirky take on the Marvel universe, quirky comedic take. And Guardians of the Galaxy, of course, catapults James Gunn into director superstardom, and now he's running DC and directing Superman. Everybody in their careers has their successful doppelganger that they despise, the person that is sort of like them in a lot of ways, but more successful. I bet for Edgar Wright, that person is James Gunn. I think it has to be. The guy who made the kind of movie you were trying to make and then now is running DC. I mean, how can Edgar Wright not be pissed about that? I mean, he has to be. I think the Ant-Man thing really, really took the wind out of this guy. And I don't, how could it not? How could it not? Because it's not like he doesn't have the goods on his own. Because the other argument is that Simon Pegg was the real talented one of the two. Jessica Hines was the real talented one of the Spaced crew. That Edgar Wright was ultimately just their director, the director that collaborated with them the best, Simon Pegg, Jessica Hines, Nick Frost, etc. But that he doesn't have the goods on his own. But that, I don't know if I agree with that, because in 2010, he makes Scott Pilgrim on his own. Scott Pilgrim vs. the World. And again, not my favorite movie, not a movie that is really my taste, but not a movie I'm going to shit on. I get why people like it. I understand why people like that movie. It's got sauce. It's got sauce to it. It's got a vision to it. It's definitely way better than the stuff he's making now. And then he makes World's End in 2013 with Simon Pegg, which I really, really like. My favorite of the Cornetto trilogy, sue me. And then it's in 2014, he gets fired by Marvel. And then after that, we begin this sharp, sharp fall off. Baby Driver, the Sparks documentary, Last Night in Soho, The Running Man. That is a sharp fall off. A sharp fall off. And I don't think Edgar Wright's unaware of it. I'm sure he's a self-aware director. And so it's no surprise to hear that he is apparently reteaming with Simon Pegg. Apparently they're working on some new projects. Apparently they have a whole new trilogy in mind. And I hope it happens. I'm not rooting against this guy. I think he's taken a sharp fall off in his career. But he's also, I think a lot of people agree with that, and the box office reflects that. So it's like, I'm not going to kick the guy while he's down. He's having a downturn. It's happened. I hope he gets back on his feet. I hope him and Simon Pegg make some great movies in the future. And you know what? I think they will. Now let's talk about a movie that left me in a much better mood than The Running Man. I'm talking about Now You See Me, Now You Don't. The third installment in Lionsgate's gleefully stupid, and I mean that as the highest compliment, gleefully stupid Now You See Me franchise. I know the freak loves the Now You See Me movies. He's always talking my ear off about how good these Now You See Me movies are, or if not how good, how fun they are. And gosh darn it, I agree. I love these movies too. I watched the first two installments this past week in anticipation of the new one. And man, oh man, these movies are stupid in a way that movies really aren't allowed to be stupid anymore. Movies in 2025 are so carefully manicured and audience tested by the time they get to theaters that they're not allowed to be so bad or stupid or fun stupid or silly stupid. They're not allowed to be like that anymore in the way that movies were silly and stupid in the 80s and the 90s. The problem with movies now is they're just too boring. And they're not wacky enough. And I'm talking about your lower tier movies. Movies. Just the slop that gets churned out every week. The problem now is that they're just boring. There's not that fun swing between the high and the low so much anymore. There's too much middling. If you look at, I've been ranking every movie this year on Letterboxd. I just have so many movies in that 2.5 stars, 2 stars range. But don't blame the Now You See Me movies, because they are keeping the dream of the 80s and the 90s alive with this gloriously stupid franchise that won't stop and is going to keep going after this box office performance. There's a cliffhanger at the end of this third one. There's going to be a fourth one. There might be a fifth one. The Now You See Me trilogy is what happens when Lionsgate, the last of the mini majors, says, "Give me an Ocean's 11. We got this thing with these magicians. Fine. We'll go with that." The Now You See Me trilogy is what happens when Lionsgate asks for an Ocean's 11 and gets a movie starring the members of a secret society of ancient magicians who are tasked with maintaining economic justice in an increasingly crumbling social order, while also putting on some crazy-ass magic shows. And it's funny that this is the last one standing of Lionsgate's franchises, at least for now. Because what made Lionsgate survive as the last of the mini major studios, right under the Universals and Paramounts and Sonys and Disneys and Warner Brothers, is their knack at finding these franchises that fell through the cracks of the major studios and turning them into mega franchises. Hunger Games, John Wick, Twilight, Saw, Divergent. When you hear those, you think major studios. Those are all Lionsgate, baby. And I know Hunger Games is in the middle of this perhaps promising reboot. But until we see how that pans out, Now You See Me is the last one standing. John Wick is petering out. They couldn't even get the new Saw movie in theaters this year. But they got a Now You See Me movie in theaters, and it crushed. Now, if you're new to the Now You See Me universe, or you just want a little refresher, here's what we've got. Jesse Eisenberg is J. Daniel Atlas. He's like, what if David Copperfield and Neil deGrasse Tyson were combined into one person? Oh boy, hide the young women. He's like, what if David, but without all that. I'm just thinking sort of professionally. He's like what would happen if David Copperfield and Neil deGrasse Tyson were mashed together. He's like a know-it-all illusionist. Woody Harrelson is Merritt McKinney. He's a mentalist who can hypnotize people with disturbing alacrity. He just goes boom, and you are like, you do whatever he says. It's disturbing. Dave Franco is Jack Wilder, a tough, streetwise magician doing card tricks on the Staten Island Ferry and picking pockets. And Isla Fisher is Henley Reeves, the Houdini of the group. She does these big sort of physical tricks. She's chaining herself up and jumping into a tank of cold water. And together these four constitute the Four Horsemen. The sort of at the beginning of the franchise, the newest recruits into this ancient secret society of magicians called the Eye. The Eye. The Eye is sort of like Ra's al Ghul's League of Shadows in Batman Begins. The Eye protects society from people that would seek to exploit it and protects people against the oligarchs and the crypto bros and so on and so forth. They're the Robin Hoods of our new late-stage capitalist hellhole. And if you ever see a flyer for a Four Horsemen magic show in your hometown, you're going to want to get tickets because everyone that goes to a Four Horsemen show gets like a minimum of $75,000 transferred to their bank account. They always like redistribute. It's like a magic show and wealth redistribution because they'll target some like Wall Street swindler who they've like lured to the show, and then they will live on the show rob him of his money and redistribute it to all the other people at the show. You've also got some other great cast members here. Lizzie Kaplan is the fifth horseman, joins the crew in part 2. Morgan Freeman, Mark Ruffalo is in these movies. Michael Caine is in some of these movies. The Now You See Me movies are so big and flashy in the funniest of ways. They are so unconcerned with being cool in this way that is so refreshing. Or being like there's like a really refreshing lack of internet speak in these movies. Dave Franco is like the best fighter in the group because he can like throw cards really fast. He's like Gambit if the cards weren't electrified and exploded on impact. And so they just sort of like break the skin of the goons that he's trying to that he's throwing them at. It'll just like they'll be like, "Ow!" And then that gives them enough time to escape. It's one of the funniest like non-lethal weapons in movie history. Dave Franco just whipping those cards at people. Whipping those cards. And over the course of this franchise, it definitely becomes more aware of itself, but not to an extent that it becomes annoyingly meta or anything like that. It just realizes that it's a little silly and it leans into that. So in part 2, Woody Harrelson plays his own twin brother and he's wearing a fright wig and doing an accent. It's that kind of hijinks, that kind of silliness. And now in the third installment, Now You See Me, Now You Don't, we've entered the new generation phase of the franchise. You've got this whole new crew of younger magicians who are joining the action. Justice Smith from I Saw the TV Glow. Dominic Sessa from The Holdovers. This is the first time I've seen him post Holdovers, and I liked him. He was fun. He's a quirky little interesting actor. I'm excited to see where his career goes. And Ariana Greenblatt from Barbie, who's great. So a really nice cast of young actors here. And then Rosamund Pike is the villain doing a hilarious like deep South African accent. Like white apartheid South African accent. I really enjoyed Now You See Me, Now You Don't. It's everything I want from these movies. It's silly, it's fun, it's so into the history of magic. There's a line very early on when Dave Franco, or I should say a hologram of Dave Franco, says, and I might get this list wrong, but it's something like this. Pandemics, climate change, war, poverty. You gotta admit, we need magic now more than ever. I wanted to stand up and applaud. I couldn't believe the just like fun, stupidity, the pure cinema of what I was watching. That's right. Now You See Me is pure cinema. I give it 3 stars. And that's a like glowing 3 stars. I had a lot of fun. Let's talk about Keeper. Keeper is directed by Osgood Perkins and written by Nick Lepard. It stars Tatiana Maslany, Rossif Sutherland, that's Donald Sutherland's son, Burkett Turton, and Eden Weiss. It's about a couple that goes for a secluded weekend in a cabin in the woods. They're still like a newish couple, but they're like starting to say I love you. Like they're right at the turning point for things to get really serious. But then some creepy shit starts happening, or what's supposed to be creepy shit, and there's a whole sort of like backstory and history, and Tatiana Maslany is in trouble, and she's got to figure it out, and spooky, spooky, spooky. This is Osgood Perkins' 3rd horror movie in 2 years for Neon. What the fuck are we doing, people? This is the 2nd Osgood Perkins Neon horror movie this year. He did Longlegs last year and The Monkey and Keeper this year. And we've been saying on this show, we delivered the warning, the dire warning. Slow down, Osgood. Slow down. You are not a talented enough filmmaker. I'm not saying you're untalented, but you are not talented enough to maintain this pace. Spielberg did Jurassic Park and Schindler's List in the same year. Okay, Spielberg can do 2 movies in 1 year. At that stage in the 90s, at that stage of his career, 20 years after Jaws, you at this early stage of your career do not need to be doing 2 movies in a year, Osgood Perkins. And sure enough, it's been diminishing returns since Longlegs, which wasn't a masterpiece. I like Longlegs. I think I gave it 3 or 3.5 stars. But since then, it has been one just rung down with each successive movie. Monkey, 2 stars, 2.5 stars. Keeper, oh boy, 1 star, people. 1 star. This is sadly not even a movie. Keeper. Abysmal. Not ready for primetime. Not ready for primetime at all. A rough draft of a movie. Why was this put into theaters in this state? I'll tell you why. It's because of this grift going on over at Neon. And I love Neon, and I get what it's like to be an independent studio. You need money. You need some box office wins. They can't distribute a Nora and it was just an accident without some box office gold. And that's what Osgood Perkins has been providing them. If you look at Neon's highest grossing movies ever, the top 3 are Parasite, and then Longlegs, and then The Monkey. Osgood has 2 of the top 3. And you can kind of treat Parasite as an anomaly. And also, I'm realizing now that's a huge asterisk, because Parasite made a massive percentage of its money in South Korea. It was one of the biggest movies ever in South Korea. And Neon didn't distribute in South Korea. They only had the American and probably Canadian distribution rights. I mean, maybe Europe if they were lucky. So the majority of Parasite's box office doesn't even go to Neon. So let's take that out of the equation. Neon's 2 highest grossing movies ever, American movies, are Longlegs and The Monkey, Osgood Perkins' last 2 movies. So look, I get it. He's their moneymaker. He's financially propping up Neon so they can distribute It Was Just an Accident. For my money, the best movie of the year that I've seen so far. But there's a point where, like, it goes from just financial savviness into grift. And where it really gets into grift is the way that they market these Osgood Perkins movies. Holy shit, do they roll out just shamelessly aggressive marketing campaigns for these at best good, but more often bad movies. They told us Longlegs was the scariest horror movie since Silence of the Lambs. It wasn't. They marketed The Monkey as though Osgood Perkins was reinventing the genre. He wasn't. And now Keeper, honestly, the crown jewel of this grift is Keeper. Because once again, like Longlegs and The Monkey, they cut a hell of a trailer for Keeper. I'm asking myself, is this the new Shining? Hell of a trailer. And then at the end of the trailer, I don't know if the last time I've seen this, if I've ever seen this, as though it was like the dust jacket of a novel. They had all of these glowing quotes from other directors about Osgood Perkins. Watch the Keeper trailer. You'll see this. James Wan, Damien Leone, the director of the Terrifier movies, who's in some hot water right now. I guess we got to talk about that maybe next week. Bong Joon-ho, speaking of Parasite. Bong Joon-ho. Neon's obviously got him on speed dial. Bong Joon-ho has a quote in the Keeper trailer and they're all about how Osgood Perkins is like the new master of horror. People, this is barely a movie. I'll say there have been worse movies this year than Keeper, but there has not been a movie less ready for distribution than Keeper that I've seen this year. It's not scary, which if you've seen the trailer is a shock. It's not scary. He doesn't know how to create dread. It's not scary. It's incoherent. It's definitely not cool or hip, even though it is clearly aspiring to be cool and hip in the cringy guy my age trying to write like Gen Z-esque dialogue. And these characters aren't even Gen Z. I don't know what this dialogue is. It's too internet speaky or something. It's not great. Above all, though, the thing that this movie really fails at, and I think Osgood Perkins in general struggles with, is figuring out how to weave the themes of the movie and the horror thrills of the movie into a singular experience where the two things feed each other. Because there's actually an interesting idea at the heart of this movie. It's scary when a relationship goes from casual to serious. Because it's like a stranger becomes part of your family overnight. There's a lot of potential for horror and for fear in that dynamic. But holy shit, take some time and develop the movie. Because that theme only exists in this tiny sort of seed form and is just botched in terms of its execution here. And look, Tatiana Maslany is I think a really good actor at this point, sort of in theory. Like, because since Orphan Black, it has been a wasteland. Can somebody give Tatiana Maslany a fucking script, please? And the other lead, Donald Sutherland's son, Rossif Sutherland, I guess is doing acting in this movie. I think it was acting that I was seeing him doing. But pretty much every choice was either wrong or forgettable, or both. This is a really bad unfinished movie that Neon tried to sell us as a masterpiece. That's malpractice. That's a grift. And the fact that it's finally translating into low box office means that we're probably finally at the end of this grift. And I actually think that's good news for Osgood Perkins, because you need to take a break. You need to take your time with the next one. You need to stop obsessing over being horror's it boy. No more Vista Theater Q&As for you for a couple years. No more going to the red carpet in like a satin Lakers jacket. Stop, okay? Leave your pick-me era behind you, Osgood. Leave the horror it boy era behind you. You've still got clout. People aren't even going to remember. The Keeper is so bad it's going to just fly under the radar. People aren't going to remember this. They'll remember Longlegs, and I think a lot of people like The Monkey, and it made money. So what the fuck do I know? You've still got clout. Take some time. I think find a new distributor. I don't think Neon. I think Neon is just pumping you for money and setting you up for failure and embarrassment like they did here. Find a new distributor. Keeper was 1 star. Now, last but not least, Die My Love. Directed by Lynn Ramsey. Co-written by Lynn Ramsey along with Enda Walsh and Alice Birch, based on the 2012 novel Die My Love by Ariana Harwitz. This movie follows Grace, played by Jennifer Lawrence, a young mother who develops postpartum depression, and alongside her partner Jackson, played by Robert Pattinson, enters into psychosis, is the log line. You've also got Lakeith Stanfield, Nick Nolte, and Sissy Spacek in this movie. Now, this was a big, a very buzzy movie coming out of the festival season, Cannes, etc. This movie definitely has Oscar aspirations. So I had a lot of expectations going into this one. And I love Lynn Ramsey. I still remember the first time I saw Ratcatcher. I know a lot of people like We Need to Talk About Kevin. I still think it's underrated. I think We Need to Talk About Kevin is amazing. Amazing. Will probably show up on my list of the best movies of the 21st century that we're doing later this year. Probably in my top 50 of the 21st century. I really like We Need to Talk About Kevin. And there's a lot of great stuff in Die My Love. I do think Jennifer Lawrence is very good in this movie. I thought Sissy Spacek was amazing in this movie. I didn't even know she was in it. That was, honestly, I sat up in my seat when she showed up. And she's fantastic in this movie. She's sort of like she is Jennifer Lawrence's mother-in-law and is sort of like her spiritual doppelganger in a way. Someone who is also dealing with depression and psychosis, but has learned to sort of live with it in ways that Jennifer Lawrence refuses to live with it. What's great about this performance is and this character is that Jennifer Lawrence is refusing to live with depression. She is externalizing her postpartum depression in this magnificent display of anarchy, essentially. Anarchy in a patriarchal world, which is the refusal to be quiet about postpartum depression. She is loud and messy and fucked up, and she's not going to be quiet about it. She's also really fucking funny. One of my favorite parts of this movie that I was surprised by is how funny it is. It is very, very funny. There's a scene where Robert Pattinson, sort of increasingly absent, befuddled, feckless husband, is trying to make Jennifer Lawrence better. It's trying to make her feel better. And into the chaos of her life at home, out in this rural house they lived in, they sort of feel, it's implied that they were like kind of city kids, city hipsters, maybe, musician, writer, and they've moved out into this country house, and that's where everything sort of goes to shit for Jennifer Lawrence, disconnected from the world out there. But Robert Pattinson's trying to make her life better, and he brings home the just yappiest, mangiest little dog. And just goes, "I brought you a dog," and hands it to her, and then like fucks off again. I think he's like a truck driver is his day job or something. It's a little unclear. And just like giving her this yappy dog and thinking he would make things better was so funny. And it just like smash cuts to Jennifer Lawrence on the floor of the house on all fours, just like barking wildly at this dog because it's driving her so crazy. This movie's really funny. It's really funny. And there's a lot of good stuff in it. But overall, it never coheres into the gut punch masterpiece that it wants to be. The postpartum depression as existential crisis masterpiece that it is aspiring to. It never quite gets there. Sometimes it veers between being like too erratic and being too on the nose and obvious with its symbolism and its visual metaphors. It also devolves, I think it also sort of devolves too much into the hysterical woman tropes that it's trying to deconstruct. I think it falls into them a little bit more than it probably wanted to. And the reason for that is I don't think this movie realizes how relatable it is. Like, it's very similar to Mary Bronstein's If I Had Legs, I'd Kick You. And again, I know I am the dad, I'm not the mom, and so my experience of raising a kid is different. And I didn't have postpartum depression, obviously. And so my perspective is different, but as a parent, I still found so much relatable. Much like Rose Byrne in If I Had Legs, I'd Kick You. I found so much relatable in Jennifer Lawrence's situation in this movie. And yet her situation was presented as so isolated that she was this like increasingly psychotic, isolated individual. And I just wanted to be like, I get you. I get all of this. Like this, you can sort of you can ground this a little bit more. You can kind of, you can trust in the relatability of this material a little bit more. But they push Lynn Ramsey pushes Jennifer Lawrence so much as this just outsider in her world. Increasingly separated from everyone around her by her depression and by her psychosis. That it starts to fall into some of these hysterical woman tropes that it's trying to, I think, deconstruct. But overall, I was on the edge of my seat for most of this movie. I was very engaged with it. It's definitely worth seeing. I'm going to give it 3.5 stars. I thought it was really good. I I am giving 1 star, though, to some really bad day for night photography that takes up way too much of this movie. A lot of this movie takes place at night. And they're clearly doing that day for night thing where they shoot during the daytime and then color correct it to look like night. But you know what that looks like. You have that image in your head where it's like night, but it looks digital or CGI or fake. I really wish they would have come up with a actual lighting solution to film at night because so much of this movie takes place at night. I was like, it was really grinding on me, this terrible day for night photography. This movie deserved better than that. But overall, definitely worth seeing. Electric, interesting, a lot going on. Not a masterpiece, but I think it was really good. 3.5 stars. Next week on Movies, baby! Oh my God, Wicked for Good is already out. Time is shifting sand underneath us. We already, I feel like it was just yesterday I was seeing Wicked in theaters, and now Wicked for Good is out. It's already been a year. Wicked for Good next week. I'm also planning on seeing Sentimental Value, the Joachim Trier movie that has a lot of award season buzz. Very excited for that. And maybe some other movies beyond those two. We'll see. Stay tuned. The movies don't quit. Neither do we. And speaking of that, the real main event, if you're a Movies Baby fan, this week, we'll be posting the first round of our Weekend at Bergman's 1980s tournament. Joe and I will be going through the first half of the Field of 32, plus some spoilers. Impossible choices. Pure chaos, pure bloodbath. You are not going to want to miss it. And that tournament will be going from now through mid-December. New episode every week, heading towards the finale. What is the greatest movie of the 1980s? The Freak. And yours truly, The Dog, will tell you what we think. And I know there's going to be a lot of opportunity for interactivity here, because if we disagree about a movie and it's a split decision, it goes up to a vote on the Patreon. And there's no way we're getting through this whole first round without some Patreon votes. I'm telling you now. So sign up at patreon.com/moviesbaby with 5 Ys. You can get a 7-day free trial. Start with that. See what you think. Get access to all this great content. Get access to the Weekend at Bergman's 1980s tournament. You can also sign up for free and participate in the polls that we do. And then get alerted about all the great stuff you're missing. Do one or the other. At least sign up for free. We would love that. It's like the new follow us on Instagram. If you want to help the show, that's where we need it, over on Patreon. Sign up for free. Sign up for a 7-day free trial. We greatly appreciate it. And we greatly appreciate all of our Patreon subscribers, our patrons. Thank you very much. This is Movies Baby. We'll see you next week, because the movies don't quit, and neither do we. Bye.